This is the Darshan Talks podcast, regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com.
Kulkarni, I'm your host. I'm an attorney and a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA-regulated products. So if you have an interest in or you work with an FDA-regulated company or its products, this is the podcast for you. So today's podcast, if you are a company that works, for example, in clinical trials, or you work with healthcare practitioners, which I'm sure most of you do, you want to be talking to my guest. My guest is someone that I would think of as the expert on telehealth. He is currently general counsel and a legal guide for Carium, which is a telehealth platform. Matt Fisher is responsible for all legal functions in the company and helps to ensure that operations meet the requirements of applicable laws and regulations. Matt works to find creative solutions when needed, and prior to joining Carium, he practiced for over a dozen mid-sized law firm where he advised clients across the healthcare spectrum on healthcare laws and regulations, as well as general business matters. Interestingly enough, and I didn't know this about Matt, he's also the host of a bi-weekly internet radio show, Healthcare du Jour, that focuses on hot topics in healthcare. And he was sharing some of the cool things he was doing. My favorite ones was he was showing me what a clot looks like and some of the cool things he gets into. So we're going to ask him a little bit about that as well. But he's the guy that you want to talk to when you're talking about privacy, when you're talking about security, when you're talking about things like telemedicine. So if you have no more questions, feel free to ask questions, by the way, on this. But our guest for today, Matt Fisher. Matt, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, no, Darshan, thank you for having me on, and thanks for the really kind introduction. Because I know some of the prior guests you've had, and it's I feel like I'm just fitting behind some of those people, because I know some of the I know I saw that you had talked to Shannon recently, and that's someone that I call and talking bad ideas around with a lot.
Shannon's great. But Matt, here's the first thing you mentioned. This is your fifth year working doing the radio show. How's that been going?
Yeah, honestly, it's a lot of fun, because it's sure, exactly like you see. It gives me an excuse to have some really fascinating conversations, because it's usually when the lawyer calls someone up, you don't get a return phone call. It's they start going, oh, what did I do wrong? But when I can lead it off with, hey, I'd like you to be a guest on my podcast, all of a sudden the tenor changes, and it's I've just found it to be an extremely great learning experience, because it's being able to talk with people working in all these different aspects of the healthcare industry. It's as I said, just so much fun, and also then gets to inform the work that I'm doing with one now in-house at Carium, and then previously with my clients, because it's just lets you get that broader perspective on things, and maybe get some insider information that would be hard to learn otherwise.
Exactly right. So let's ask another question. You started with Carium recently, but worked as outside counsel, and you're starting to build a department for them, which is going to be amazing. So first of all, congratulations to you.
Thank you.
But my question, I guess I didn't lead with a question there. My question for you is, if I'm a law student, if I'm a lawyer starting out, I'm seeking out opportunities, how did you decide that moving in-house was right for you?
Yeah, it was, kind of ultimately it came down to was, I'd been working with the company on the outside for a couple of years, and, got to know the team, and frankly, also over the past kind of year plus, got to work with them even more closely, almost like more of a full-scale outside general counsel. So it was, getting that comfort level, and then, just frankly, healthcare overall is an exciting industry to be a part of. And then also digital health in particular, I think is, has taken off, especially because of the pandemic. So, kind of all those pieces coming together, and, being presented with the opportunity, it felt like one of those, kind of pathways in life where if I didn't pursue it, I was going to regret it. And it kind of went from there because, honestly, I don't know if I necessarily had anticipated shifting outside of the firm where I was at, where I'd actually been since law school. So it's really just kind of a prime example of you never know what life is going to throw at you, and just kind of taking a leap of faith.
It's interesting you talk about that leap of faith because one of the things I've been talking to a lot of people about is this issue of trust, and I think that there's a huge element as you jump in where you start going, you know what, I like technology this company's bringing to the table, but do I like the people? Do I want to work with these people? How did you sort of begin by making that evaluation for yourself on, do I want to work with these people?
Yeah. Right from the start, I happen to have met one of the co-founders at HIMSS a couple of years ago. So just, kind of one of those serendipitous meetings, and it was, we hit it off right away. I liked the way he was thinking, and, then he introduced me to some of the other kind of leads on the team, and, just one, hearing about the concerns that they had, because it's at Carium, the central focus is we want to support patients and enhance the role of patients, and that's kind of been a throughput and a common theme that is very important for the company as a whole, and something that kind of informs how some of the development work is done, and also how we'll interact with the health system or other clients that we're now working with. It's we want to make sure that this is being put out there to support the patient, which is I think a very important perspective to be promoting. So that's one piece of it. But then the other piece was, just the chance to be able to meet and to interact with, the team members, and, have been working with them for so long that it's, as best as possible when you're on the outside, actually coming in with an informed perspective and not just, kind of getting the dog and pony show through an interview process. It was like, I actually got to really work with a lot of the folks, and just found them to be asking great questions, to always be concerned about a lot of different considerations, and just that openness for collaboration. So that, as I said, that kind of all combined, and it just created, it seemed like a natural extension and transition from the type of environment where I've been used to of, a firm where culture was very much an essential part of how it operated and informed decisions of how the business was run. And it just felt like Carium operates exactly the same way.
Which is really interesting. So before we dig in a little bit deeper, could you tell us a little bit more about what Carium does?
Sure. So kind of, I like to describe it as a telehealth platform. So a lot of what it does is it enhances patient engagement and care management, care coordination. So there's two sides to it. There's the patient-facing side, which can either be a mobile app or a web-based UI or user interface. It allows for collection from devices that people have in their home, whether it be a smartwatch or other wearable, but also kind of medical-grade devices of blood pressure cuffs, scales, glucose monitors. Depending on it all depends on kind of the use case that we're in there for. Because it can support remote patient monitoring, chronic care management, any of those kind of newer modes of reimbursement that Medicare and private payers recognize. So it pulls the data from those devices, can also allow the patient to message or video chat or enter journal entries, track their nutrition, because that's a big component that we had added in through work with a client. So all that data gets collected, and then on the care team side, you have this great dashboard and their web-based interface where they're seeing all this come in. They can also post information back to the patient, whether it be surveys, reminders, informational pieces, or again, initiate a direct text or video or audio interaction. And then it can also integrate into the EMR and have this kind of seamless integration. But it's, the reason I call it a platform is because we can flow across so many different use cases. It's, I mentioned RPM and CCM, but we also, as I said, again, we do some nutrition. We're starting to get into the hospital at home program. That's been part of CMS's expansion of care access as a result of COVID. Can do cardiac management, starting to integrate mental health interventions, and stroke care. So it's the platform itself is very adaptable. And the other thing is, kind of as you said, you heard me mention the care team. We are not trying to replace the existing care team or create a wedge in between the existing care team and the patient. We're providing the tools and the support to enable and enhance what the existing care team can do. So it's you're not diverting anything. It's really, I think, helping to strengthen that relationship between the patients and their existing care team.
So the question then becomes, we already have a bunch of different telehealth platforms, whether you're talking about what Epic does or what Cerner has, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What makes something like Carium go, we can do this better, or we're fitting into a niche that others aren't covering? So what was it that you saw that you think that there's a future here?
Yeah, one of those big pieces that I saw, again, is that adaptability. Because a lot of other solutions that we see out in the market are targeted solely to RPM or solely to like diabetes prevention or management. Whereas, as I said, we can flow across all of those, and it's we've seen a lot of success of we will start working with one client on let's use cardiac as one example. So we start getting into their cardiology group or post-cardiac event, and allows for the interaction with the patient home. But then people start seeing, this, it's a very easy to use platform. We can bring in all these different sources. And now we start moving into like diabetes or the hospital at home or RPM. So it's, kind of that scalability. So that way it's, you can do all these different, uses or care models within the same type of platform without having to continually engage different vendors. We can keep incorporating all these different pieces, and you're still working within that one system. So it's, I think that aspect, it gives us a pretty strong place in the marketplace. And also, we've heard from a number of people that, both patients and care team members, that they find the platform extremely easy to use, that it presents the data in a easy to understand, easy to break down manner. And it's, so the usability aspect is always a big component to it. Because if you got something that people find hard to use, not to pick on the EMRs, but, not many clinicians are big fans of them. If it's something you actually like going into and something that helps your workflow, you're going to see the utilization follow and increase.
So one of the things you mentioned in there is this, obviously, one of the differentiating factors for Carium is the fact that it's easy to use. One of the other differentiating factors you mentioned is that you can go across different platforms and you can go across different use cases. One of the things we are starting to think about, by the way, we already have someone saying this is a great conversation, so thank you, Isaac. One of the things I'm starting to is someone like Amazon, for example. Amazon is coming in and saying, you know what, we want to potentially connect with patients. And one of the big concerns we all have is, you're going to get my health data, but I don't know how you're going to use it. Are you going to try to sell me something else? So that privacy and security of data becomes a real question. For some, and again, we're not speaking now about Carium specifically, but we're talking about the telehealth platforms in general. How do startups in the telehealth world go, you know what, we're going to address this question head on, and we're going to go, we use your data in this specific way? Or do you go, we're in the world to fix your health, and that includes all forms of it, and then that gets into data ownership? So I'd love to hear your comment on that a little bit.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I think it depends on, are you talking about a company that has started and is growing up within the healthcare industry, or is it someone coming in? And I do see probably some fairly clear differentiators there, because the companies that are fully entering and developing within healthcare, at least the ones that I think will succeed, and luckily the ones like Carium or others that I've worked with over the past few years, are asking these questions and are thinking about it. So they're understanding they have to bake in HIPAA as a baseline, and make sure that they're hitting all the right notes when it comes to appropriate privacy and security protections. Using Darshan, using your example of Amazon or Google being in the news recently because of other expansions that Google is having with its health system deals. When you've got general consumer organizations like that coming into healthcare, there's already this baseline either distrust or question about the motivation behind getting access to the data. Because everyone knows, like, Google has all these other business lines where this data would be invaluable and would certainly help to push other products. So there is, even if they're doing everything appropriately and complying exactly with what they're supposed to be doing, there's always going to be those background questions that are coming up. I'm going to be quite honestly interested to see how those companies try to address that, because I don't know if they've necessarily been doing a great job of trying to get out in front and talk about how, okay, this is how we're walling off the healthcare data when we're in this, in this space, which is again a different approach from companies that are fully within healthcare. That's all they're doing, because there you have that baseline expectation that if they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, they're probably going to go out of business, because this, I can tell you, on having gone through contracting with big health systems, they do an extremely thorough vetting of security. And there are a lot of hurdles that you have to jump over, which is why, frankly, it's so much easier once you're in and once you have an agreement with someplace that you can expand, because you have that leg up on other solutions that are out there. Because if, say, Department A is contracted with you, but Department B hears about it and they want to use it, if you say, oh, we're already contracted, all you have to do is add a statement of work, they know that you've already been vetted and by their security teams, by their legal teams, by everybody else, that this is something that you can trust. So it also kind of goes in that direction of, is there going to be some type of overarching privacy scheme where we're not doing it industry by industry, but just having maybe one common federal one, similar to GDPR in Europe, or what you might see in some places in Asia. Question if that could change the landscape. But at the moment, I think it's, if someone is targeting healthcare, they're going to have, there's going to be a different view to them than to these larger kind of tech behemoths pivoting to come into healthcare.
So that raises the question of data ownership at the smaller company level. So someone like a Carium, for example, again, not specifically speaking about Carium. How do you address, one of the questions I've been discussing with people before was, let's say you're in a clinical trial, and in the context of a clinical trial, the pharmaceutical company says, we own all the data because you're doing the testing for us. The hospital says, we own all the data because we have the patient. The patient's going, it's my data. But I've actually heard that EMRs go, you guys can all own all the data all you want, but we have access to it and we control it and we can do whatever we want with it. How does a Carium address the question of data ownership or smaller vendors?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question, and it's one that I think is evolving, because it's one that I've seen come up a few times, or not a few times, many times over the previous couple of years. But one, I think you kind of have to start with what are the relationships between all the parties, because in most cases, the vendor, whether it's Carium or any other kind of platform like that, typically you're in the role of the business associate. You're not actually the direct covered entity, so you're providing access, arguably on behalf of call it the hospital system, or maybe you're supporting a clinical trial and you're supporting the sponsor. So there's someone who's higher up from you in kind of that contractual chain. So from one person, in that higher up entity, by typically what I find is probably some level of state regulation, because HIPAA doesn't talk about ownership. Usually if you're talking about ownership of a record or who has to maintain records, it's from a state perspective. So I'll use a hospital system as an example. If the vendor is providing access as a service to the hospital system, any information or patient-related information that's being created in the platform is likely part of that medical record of that higher up contracting client. So one perspective, they own the data, because that's probably, except for one or two states, that's the entity that owns the data. Off the top of my head, New Hampshire is the only state that I think is still says the patient owns all their own data.
Right.
That's one piece of it. The other piece of it, though, is for a lot of these platforms, even though the system is providing the access, you're still having the end patient or the patient as end user sign up for some type of an account or sign up for some type of access. And at that point, you can also say, hey, you patient, you're entering all this information, because of the way you're getting access, you're authorizing it to be shared with your provider, your clinician or your system. But at the same time, we can say we're creating, call it a duplicate copy, even though it's probably just one database, but we're creating a duplicate copy that we're going to say is your data and that you can take and use how you will and be able to retain it. Because with Carium as the example, like even if, say, the health system that we're working with, not that we'd want to see it, but if they ended their contract, we'd say to the patient, hey, you can still keep storing your data in our system for free because, once you shut off the access, anything you keep adding and everything you've added before, that's your data. And then to get back to the previous point around privacy, that's where you have to be very considerate around, I think, the privacy policy and your terms of use, and being extremely clear of what laws might apply when and how you're going to respect the data. So it's kind of using going back to Carium, that was one of the things that I always liked, was they were very much of the view of, we're trying to help patients, we're trying to allow them to collect their and store and manage their data, and we're not going to be taking advantage of that. We're not going to be out there trying to sell your data, even if it's not protected by HIPAA, because it's we've got that direct to consumer aspect to it potentially. We want to respect your rights, and we're here to be helping you. And I think, and I've been hearing that come up more and more from technology companies who are coming into this space. So long way of saying there's multiple perspectives, I think, of who owns the data, but I think it is possible to keep splitting these hairs. And I think it will be important to do that because it's certainly going in that direction with the upcoming information blocking rules coming into effect and saying patients need to be able to get and move their data and put it where they want to.
So it's funny you mentioned information blocking rules, because that's actually an area that's getting super hot in the life sciences. And what I'm thinking about is I get pulled into questions on data transparency, and I get pulled into questions on the EMA is the European version of the FDA. The EMA is saying things like, one, patients to have access to their data. The closest thing we have is the data blocking, the information blocking rules that we're looking at in the US. My question is, do you think that clinical trial management systems, which obviously latch into that have this data, are going to have to start in the future, start connecting with a group like Carium or connecting to EMRs so that patients can access their data? Or do you think that it's always been it was EMRs for healthcare, not for pharma? Do you have a perspective on that, or you just don't know off the top of your head?
Yeah, I guess I think it all goes back to breaking down silos, which is another, I keep saying common themes over the past few years, but it feels like a lot of these discussions around, whether if you're talking about access or the flow of data, those are, points of discussion that keep coming up. So it's, I definitely would personally support any movement to remove all those barriers and allow the data to flow around. And, it's, being a member of various groups that focus on patient advocacy and patient rights. Clinical trials do come up in those places a lot because it's, there is the feeling at times that it's impossible to get to that data, and it's hard to see how it's interacting with your longer term history of healthcare information. So I think opening up those gates and allowing it all to interact, and ultimately probably that means coming back to the patient or to the individual, because the individual is the only one who's having that kind of consistent, comprehensive, viewpoint of what their health is going to be important, especially as we keep transitioning into a more value and quality-based healthcare system, where it is definitely more focused on that preventative side of medicine as opposed to reactive when something pops up.
So do you see a future where patient information is going to be stored in a blockchain and people accessing that? Or is that
I know that one is one I've had that discussion a number of times, and it's I know that there's obviously more than one company out there that's trying to push that perspective. I'm not going to say that's not going to happen. The question I still always have is, well, who controls the blockchain? And oftentimes that's put to me as, well, the patient's going to control it. And I then I often ask, okay, well, what happens if you're in the middle of a care relationship and the patient gets upset and just shuts off all access? And, that the hospital or the physician probably still has some other legal obligation to be maintaining the record. But if it's all in the blockchain that they can't control, they might be in violation of a regulation governing their practice or their operations, or maybe a condition of participation in a payer program. So I think there's a lot of, it's not so simple to say, oh, we'll put records in a blockchain and that the patient controls it. Because as always with healthcare, there's so many different interconnected layers that when you peel one away, or if you try to alter one, you've now created 100 different ripples, 99 of which you probably didn't anticipate.
Right. Last question before I get into something else, which was you talked about the hurdles and the difficulty of entering into a contract with hospitals because they do such rigorous security testing. Was it easier during COVID in that suddenly people were like, we need a telehealth platform, otherwise we have no way of treating patients? Were those barriers lowered in the last year and a half? And if so, should they remain lowered, or are they rising back up?
Yeah, I think it depends. It's, I've definitely heard the stories of, people were just told, sign up for free account for whatever service, just to, back last March, coming up on it almost a year ago now, just so you can keep seeing your patients. But, as the systems or the groups actually then start to try and get a handle on it and actually, go back and I would say fix the lack of enterprise level arrangements and or the lack of compliant relationships, because, we are still, as we're recording this in February of 2021, operating under the public health emergency and the enforcement discretion under HIPAA. So you arguably still don't even need to use a HIPAA compliant telehealth solution. You still use one of those non-public facing solutions that was referenced in the initial guidance. But I think as the systems actually, continue to utilize or re-examine what was being done and engaging through their normal channels, those security reviews, I would say, just from experience over the past year, did not change at all. The vetting still occurred. Probably the one problem might have been was attention kept getting diverted to COVID-specific issues. So, at times it felt like it was taking longer than usual. But kind of, even though it sounds like I'm being hard on the systems about, creating those, that lengthening the time from engagement to contracting, I definitely feel for and appreciate and understand exactly why they're doing it, because at the end of the day, it's the system that is going to take the reputational hit if security and privacy aren't maintained.
Thank you for those questions. I have a quick set of rapid fire questions. Are you okay with those?
Yeah, I'll try to not act like a lawyer and actually give fast responses.
Fair enough. What is an accomplishment you're most proud of?
My family, and and doing the best I can to raise my kids.
Very cool. Who is your hero or heroine, and why?
Ooh, that's a hard one. I'll take it a little bit differently. I'll just say, my mentor, who was someone I worked with at my firm, and I would definitely not be the lawyer I am without his patient training and tutelage. He trained me of, I don't care how long it takes, let's just get it right. And it doesn't matter how many iterations you have to do. And also, look to work closely with your clients or whoever you're working with so you can get to know it, because, businesses don't want legal answers. They want business advice. And you need to know what they're thinking to actually be able to help them understand how the law, especially in healthcare, is going to influence that.
What is your favorite way to give back to your community?
Organizational involvement, and it's I view community both locally and more broadly. So it's I like to get involved with many different organizations, and frankly, that's how we got to meet. Is because of the ABA.
Yep.
And that's just, I think, one of those great examples of a good organization to be working with.
Absolutely. How do you define success?
Being happy with what you're doing.
What challenges you?
I think the biggest challenges are trying to chart the path forward, especially, at least professionally when I'm thinking about healthcare, because it's, you kind of have to zig and zag quite a bit. So picking your way through that path is the challenge, but it's also one of the most fun parts of being in this, in this field.
Absolutely. What is your favorite movie?
Oh, my son keeps asking me this at dinner. I'm going to go with Star Wars at this point.
Well, you got to be more specific than that. You've got 9 of them right now.
A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back.
Okay, so you're purist, the originals.
Yeah, and actually another one of the greatest successes is the fact that A New Hope is the movie that my almost 8-year-old son has seen the most in his life. And I think he has potentially seen it more times than I have, because he is like up over 20 times.
Good for him. That's awesome. I heard that they're actually planning on another whole set soon. So as long as they don't mess that up, you'll expect some more. What is the most fun you've had recently?
Sledding with my kids.
Very cool. If you were a superhero, what would your powers be?
I've always been fascinated by the healing factor that you see in a bunch of different characters.
Okay. So you'd be like a reverse rogue, if you will, for lack of a better term.
I guess I had Wolverine on the mind, because that was my favorite character growing up.
Okay, fair enough. If you won $1 million, what would you buy?
Honestly, I don't know if I'd buy anything. Except maybe pay off the mortgage on my house. Or actually, maybe I'll I guess the one thing I'd buy is maybe just tickets to go traveling, because I like exploring new places.
Okay. If you were going to build a 2020 Mount Rushmore, who would be the first person on it? Why?
I guess it's a combination of just any physician and any nurse, recognizing the extreme toll that they all had to face and are continuing to face in addressing COVID, and basically doing all this work without having needing or asking for any direct recognition.
I find that really interesting, because and this is not a political statement, this is more of a general statement. Even if you went physician, you didn't go Fauci. You went for the anonymous part of it. You wanted it to be the people who don't want to be recognized. I think that's interesting. That's fascinating.
To some degree, it's probably, like my wife is a physician, and, we have a lot, obviously because of that, not because of that, just because of, some of the circles that we're in. It's, I know a lot of physicians that have been hearing about those issues, kind of what everyone has been facing for a long time. So it's, that's, I think that's informed, my perspective on it.
Very cool. And last question, what makes you happy?
Hanging out with my family, and also just being able to get some quiet time, listen to music, and read.
Okay, very, very cool. So, Matt, I do want to quickly go through. We talked about patient engagement. We talked about telehealth. We talked about the impact of that on data ownership. We talked about some of the value that Carium brings to the table, whether it's the fact that it goes across different platforms, or the fact that you can actually connect with patients through surveys and reminders and the like. We talked about privacy, and we talked about data ownership. Anything I missed?
No, I don't think so. I think that was a great recap of a very wide-ranging but really fast conversation.
We're way longer than we usually go, but you're a fascinating person to talk to, so thank you. Matt, again, where can they find your podcast, your radio show, and how can they reach you?
Yep, so Healthcare du Jour is hosted on Healthcare Now Radio. healthcarenowradio.com. It's also available on all the podcasting platforms under that name, because they aggregate all the various shows on the network under the one name. And then Carium, you can find us at Carium is Carium, So you can find us at carium.com. And as you know, I'm also on Twitter all the time. So my handle is at Matt. So it's MATT_R_Fisher, and it's FISHER.
And if you like this podcast, leave a message, comment, subscribe. You can find me at Darshan Talks on Twitter. And Matt, thank you so much for this podcast. I'd love to have you on again.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. It was a lot of fun, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come on.
This is the Darshan Talks podcast, regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com.